Linda, do you want to hit record? We are recording. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. We really appreciate you coming out to hear some of our insights about giving public comment. Last week, we covered the what and the why of public comment. We talked about kind of the situationals of what happens at a meeting. We gave examples, and we talked to you about how to go from an idea to an action. And this week, we're going to talk more about crafting your message, your delivery, and then some other tips. These are kind of next level things that we learned over time. So hopefully these are the things that you might not have thought about or experienced before, and hopefully you'll get a little bit of new insight. So to begin with, we're going to introduce ourselves. These are the presenters tonight who are helping to train. My name is Carl Aldinger, and I am the conservation organizer for Sierra Club San Diego. I volunteered with San Diego 350. I helped co-found the San Diego hub of the Sunrise Movement in 2018, and I currently serve as the president for the North County Climate Change Alliance. I also work weekly with members of the Quality of Life Coalition, the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance, and the newly formed San Diego Building Electrification Coalition. Berta Rodriguez is an organizer for Climate Action Campaign. She coordinates volunteers and facilitates meetings and events at the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance. Berta is also an aunt who's been enjoying family bike rides, hikes, building raised beds, and planting lots of spicy chilies in the family garden. Joe Hood has decades of experience presenting multi-day seminars on network technologies and business strategies to tens of thousands of adults in over 50 countries. Joe's an active member of the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance, where he co-leads the Transforming Political Power Committee. Joe's also a board member of the North County Climate Change Alliance, and he's looking forward to having fun together today. Yolindo Montiero owns a graphic design studio and is a board member of Business for Good San Diego. She began volunteering with the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance last summer, and Yolindo was inspired by her experiences giving public comment and also witnessing others. And it was her idea to host this training so that we can share tips and tricks with you all. Rita Clement lives in Chula Vista. After working for the Social Security Administration for 45 years, Rita joined local climate activist group San Diego 350 in September of 2018. Having worked in the downtown San Diego region for 12 years, she has witnessed many of the daily struggles that people experiencing homelessness in San Diego face. Rita is the co-lead of the San Diego 350 South Bay Eco Justice Team and also volunteers on the legislative and transportation committees. Rita continues to learn more about the changing climate and climate solutions as she hopes that you find this public comment training valuable for your activism. So last week we ended with a suggestion that you help gain some skills at giving public comment, and we wanted you to come prepared to give a 1-minute comment. Now, I know that not everybody will have done that necessarily, but we really hope that you did. And so we're looking now for raised hands. And if somebody is interested in trying to give their public comment, this would be a nice time for you to do it. It's a safe space. You will not receive any criticism. We just want to give you a chance to practice. Do we have any volunteers? Barb, would you like to unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted, I think, right?
There's actually another Barb here.
Oh, two Barbs.
Yeah, we have two Barbs.
Which one do you want, me or the other one?
The other one, I saw her hand up. So Barb, you have approximately 1 minute. We won't cut you off, but go ahead and start giving your comment, please.
Is it, say the last name?
Collins.
Barbara Collins, okay.
Yeah, in Oceanside.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, I'm Barbara Collins. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. If I give a city council member a check for $10,000 for their campaign, and then I come before the council and ask them for something that I need, please raise your hand if you think that my check, my donation will have absolutely no effect whatsoever on their vote. I don't see any hands raised. Of course not, because that is a ludicrous question. It will have an effect. Yet Oceanside is one of the only 4 cities in our county that have absolutely no limit on city council campaign donations. We need to do something about that. The cities around us, like San Marcos and Sanitas, they cap it at $250. Vista, $300. Now, this is not going to solve all the problems with money in campaigns, but this is something that we could do and must do. Let's cap donations for city council candidates. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Barb. Thank you very much. We also have Pat with her hand raised.
Yes.
Pat, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Honorable Mayor, City Council members, my name is Pat Torona. I am a resident of District 1 in Oceanside. Have you noticed how many vehicles sit idling in parking lots? I would like the City of Oceanside to consider a more comprehensive ordinance on vehicles idling. Currently, there is an anti-idling ordinance for schools and parks. I ask the city to expand the scope to include the whole city. According to Oceanside's Climate Action Plan on page 210 regarding emissions, we will not achieve levels set for 2050 without further local action. The cost would be minimal, posting of signs at significant locations. It is not a policing ordinance, but one to educate and remind residents of the harm they are doing by letting their cars idle more than 3 minutes. The city of Del Mar has had an ordinance for years and could provide their insight. I ask that the city make this a future agenda item. Thank you. And also I want to say that I reached out to actually an ex-city council person in Del Mar, and she had some insight. Would you like me to read what she said?
Sure.
Okay. She said how you might want to put in your presentation how the important policy is be regulated and what it might cost for Oceanside. And she said these are general things for anybody making presentations. What is your climate action plan's goals and how these might achieve these goals? And the counter voices in Oceanside, what are their arguments, etc. She couldn't see any reason why, but I just wanted to mention that also. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I see Paige's hand up.
Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
use the prompt that I was given, right? Okay. Hello, supervisors. My name is Paige DeCino, and I volunteer with the Sierra Club in large part to ensure a livable future for my grandchildren. After decades of research confirming the catastrophic impact of climate change, and with the UN just last week saying countries aren't doing nearly enough to cut greenhouse gas emissions to meet the Paris Agreement goals, it's reassuring that the Board of Supervisors is considering a path to achieve a zero carbon future. Every level of government must set ambitious targets with the thought of considering those communities most affected by climate change and with plans for just transition for workers in the new greener economy. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Paige. All right. Folks, help me out. Are there any other hands up? And you can raise your hand physically with your camera on if you can't find a way to raise your hand on the system. Or you can just unmute yourself and call out. I don't want to miss anyone. Barbara, did you come with comment ready? Barbara Diamond? Okay. I'm going to hit ask to unmute and see if that helps you.
Okay, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted. Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, so I used those talking points that you sent out, and I wasn't really familiar with the whole thing, so I kind of used my imagination to do this. So Good evening, council members. I'm Barbara Diamond. I'm a member of Sierra Club. Both Supervisor Tara Lawson and Supervisor Nora Vargas have my support and admiration for taking on such a daunting task. I haven't read anything about the proposed plan, but I am hoping that a marketing campaign is included, particularly in the initial phases. Attitudes and beliefs are, according to my observation, all over the map. Strategies, strategic communication on varying platforms is needed to be designed to persuade and involve the populace. I am also wonder if Supervisor Jim Desmond of District 5 has been involved or approached to include the resources and needs of the North County area, which is obviously different from the South. The other aspect of providing both good working conditions and good compensation is, I would say, an assumed given, but I'm not sure about that. This will require much negotiation with both unions and local governments. Technology will create new work classifications, which will require a human resources department to define new job descriptions, the competencies necessary, and a recruitment strategy. And the last part is the idea of addressing the climate sensitive vulnerable population is a mind-boggling concept. So many variables are interacting, making change a constant. One needs to listen to the news to identify vulnerable people and sadly realize that will multiply. I think I'm going over too long, but it goes on like that. And I have to say, I realize I have a tendency to ramble, and I cut this back and back, but that's basically what I have to say.
Thanks, Barbara. That's why we're here, is to experience this, try it out, and learn from that experience so that you're going to do even better.
I learned a lot just trying to do it. I didn't realize it was going to be so difficult.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad that,
like they really do it naturally.
well, some of them have been experiencing doing this already. I
Yeah.
think I've heard you give public comment before, Barbara, so you're not a first timer, I don't think. But you're right, it takes some practice, and so that's why we're all here. And I really appreciate everybody having the courage to give their comment tonight. I'll ask one more time in case there's anybody else who I didn't see their hand up. Okay, Charles, I see your hand up. Go ahead, please.
All right, great. Thank you for the presentation last week and this week. It's very constructive. I also just want to apologize. I might have to end in my part of the meeting early because I have another commitment. So I apologize if I have to duck out early. At any rate, I just followed the script that was provided, and so I'll go from there. Hello, council members. My name is Charles Pope. I am a volunteer with the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance. The Alliance applauds Supervisor Lawson and Supervisor Vargas for their leadership on the proposal to develop a regional sustainability plan to achieve a zero carbon future for the San Diego region. With local governments across the region struggling to meet basic climate goals and no governments planning for zero carbon, which climate science identifies as a top priority, it is now critical that we create a more coordinated and regional approach. The framework proposed by Supervisors Lawson and Vargas will provide the critical roadmap for doing that. We recommend that this roadmap also identify how we prioritize communities of concern on the front lines of the climate crisis, as well as ensure a just transition for workers impacted by the transition to a clean energy economy. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment today.
That's great, Charles. Thank you. and it's okay if you can't make the whole meeting. We will have recordings and we'll send out an email to everybody afterwards, so you can listen to the remainder of the meeting if you're not able to finish it with us. All right, I see some other names, but no other hands. Last call, if anybody else would like to speak, or if any of my co-presenters are seeing hands that are up, you can just unmute yourself if I'm not seeing you. I want to make sure we don't miss anyone. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on with the presentation now. And thank you again for everybody that spoke tonight. Usually you will actually hear the council members say thank you to all who spoke, especially when it's an important issue to them. They may actually give you some thank you for all of your public comment, and that's always welcome when we go out of our way to attend their meeting. So hopefully that'll happen to you all when you give your public comment. All right, so let's start with tonight's presentation. In case you weren't here last week, the ask was to speak on the subject of the County of San Diego developing a zero carbon sustainability plan. So that's what you guys just spoke on. Some of you did. I'm gonna move on. Okay, so last week we worked on tips to get you to and through a meeting. And this time we're going to be working on giving the best comment that you can give. The best way to know what you're going to say is to sit down well ahead of time and type it out. To make something great, you'll need to make a first draft and edit it. Your time to comment and the attention that you get from the elected officials are both short. So go ahead and write your magnum opus. It's better to find out right now that you just don't have time to say all those things that you'd really like to. My first suggestion is that you should write out the full text of whatever you're going to say. Some people tend to write an outline form, write some notes. My experience says that if you write the full text, you're literally scripting the entire comment. There are a lot of good reasons to do it this way. You will not get stuck in the middle trying to remember what you were going to say or searching for a word. You will know exactly the words that you will be using, and you can time exactly how long it will take you to say it. You will find hidden tongue twisters, and you will have to reword some things until it flows well. And writing everything down will allow you to edit it much better. You'll notice if you've failed to mention a keyword or if you've used one too many times. When you're finished your comment revision, I recommend that you print it out in big, bold, easy to read lettering. This is your version of a teleprompter. So break up the spacing and use the whole page. You can see an example of it here in the photograph. Sometimes there are words that you want to really emphasize, but when you're reading, you might miss that emphasis. So use all cap letters or highlight that important word so you remember to say it louder, more slowly, or with a pause. Notice on the example shown here that I did both highlight and capitalize when I would say, we do not expect to see plans. The worst thing I could have done was to not emphasize not, and maybe somehow inadvertently say we expect to see plans. We do not expect to see plans, and then I gave an example of what I didn't want to see. Remember last week we talked about the agenda and the importance of understanding the item number that you'll be speaking about. So consider putting that the item number and the name of the agenda topic at the top of your page, the page that you're printing out of your public comment. That'll give you an easy reference, and you don't have to thumb through the agenda at the last minute to be sure you're on the right topic. And I can tell you sometimes there may be subsequent items on the agenda with similar names. So there may be like kind of two steps to something they're trying to cover. And so you really want to be sure that you've got the right item number and you're prepared at the right time. Most public meetings require you to state your name for the record, so you should always lead with that. Some clerks are sticklers and they may cut you off if you start into your comment without telling them who you are. If you're there representing an organization, be sure that you're authorized to use your organization's name in your comment. And if so, briefly state that in the same line, maybe with a short member count, or perhaps a phrase like our city's oldest civil rights group, if that's the case. It is important to check with your organization, very important. Your opinions on matters are your own. And even if you feel like your organization would probably agree with those words, it's not for you alone to decide. If you're a staff member, a board member, or a chair of a committee, then this is an area that, and it's an area that you do your work in, that you're commenting on, you may have more latitude to speak on behalf of your org without running comments by everyone. Do not spend a lot of time describing how many years, months, days, or hours you've personally lived or worked in the area. Instead, you can just let them know you're a resident. In the case that you're not representing an organization, that's often what I hear people say, I'm a resident of Carlsbad. Instead, excuse me, so they want to hear your issue, but they don't really want to hear your life history. So avoid wasting an inordinate amount of time thanking the council one by one for giving you the opportunity to speak, which I've heard some people do in their opening. And I have to think that either they immediately grab for their phone or drink when they're hearing every council member's name get listed off. They want to go home early, not late. So don't waste their time saying something that's kind of obvious. It is nice to address them, but I would recommend not doing it individually. All right, we're going to hear an example of this public comment now. And this is actually Berta. And Diolinda, did you get a chance to ratchet up the volume here, or should I warn people to turn their volume up?
I pulled it up a little bit. Hopefully
Okay.
it's gonna work.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Bertha Rodriguez. Bertha, you can start when you're ready.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Bertha Rodriguez, calling on behalf of Climate Action Campaign and the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance, a coalition of 50 local organizations and small businesses committed to ensuring the San Diego region achieves a zero carbon economy by 2035 in a way that creates good union jobs and more equitable communities. Today, we urge you to approve Item 10A, the Climate Emergency Resolution, an important document to acknowledge the gravity of the climate crisis and how critical full community-wide participation will be to achieve a zero carbon future. We want to emphasize the resolution highlights the need for active consultation, participation, and benefit of workers and disadvantaged communities. We especially want to highlight the need to ensure a just transition for workers by creating good paying union jobs in the green economy. We applaud Commissioner Wong for his hard work on this resolution, as well as Encinitas for steadfast dedication for leading the region on climate action. Thank you.
Okay, folks, so that was pretty textbook. Nice job, Berta, on that.
Thank you. Next speaker is Bertha Rodriguez.
So some of what I'm about to say, you'll see kind of echoing back from what you just saw Berta do. Assume that there may be folks present who state opposing opinions on your subject. You might be using similar language to them. So it's critical that the people listening to you can tell what you want. They may tune you out or get distracted while you speak, so don't leave them guessing. Particularly if you are asking for a nuanced change or an adjustment, to be clear that please be clear that you are either in support or do not support anything that will be voted on that day. Experienced speakers often open and close with a sentence that states their position clearly. Notice in this example, I don't lead with a story or any reasons. I lead with our position. You can see that highlighted there. Like the first thing out of my mouth after I introduce myself is that we support the community emissions reduction plan. Your main goal is to generally to help encourage the council to do something or vote in a certain way. But there's more to that. You can use public comment to help move the public too. Your audience may include elected officials or the city staff where they're giving presentations as well. But there are also the other interested parties who are attending the council, maybe even your opposition. And if you happen to be speaking about a hot button topic, the press may be watching for a soundbite for the news. Without being bombastic, you can help set the stage for your next campaign, like I did with comments that included the concept of full building decarbonization. This version of the story ran in the Times of San Diego, and then the exact same story was picked up by KPBS and Fox. In fact, I knew they were the exact same story because they quoted my name wrong in two different paragraphs. So, so that is all to say that we don't always just speak to the council. There's a room, and also if it's an important topic, you may be helping to influence others by the comment that you give. So now we're going to hear from Berta, who's going to help us with some of the details.
Thank you, Carl. So let's dig into the details of what you need to say in your public comment. Next slide. So, all right. The officials really don't look forward to public comment unless they happen to be a champion on your subject and you're showing up to give them support. In general, public comment can be quite boring. So do your best to be a speaker that makes a punchy, brief statement. It may be much more memorable than someone who runs through impossible statistics and just runs on into just rambling and just discussing about everything. And it's like really hard to keep in mind. So keep it simple. You do not have time to have a complex, in-depth argument about your issue. Elected officials may be distracted. So it is up to you to grab their attention. Be punchy, be memorable, and avoid and delete unnecessary words. Although this may seem like a lot easier said than done, I know I have a hard time cutting down all my public comments. Always the first draft is always like a huge paragraph. It looks like an essay. So don't worry about it. Practice, and no one's a good writer. So to be a good writer, you must edit, rewrite, fix, and edit again, and practice if you have time. Read it out loud. I always read mine out loud multiple times just in case if I'm saying something wrong or if I miss a word or two, or if it just sounds like a little bit weird. In the end, you'll find what works best for you. And so just make sure not to be too nervous. You're going to do this right. Sometimes you might mess up, but that's okay. Next slide. Okay, so this could be quite difficult. What do you want to say in your public comment? I often hear people get stuck with deciding to tell a story or report facts, or if you're like me, you get super nervous and do not know what to say at all. Either technique is great. You can even combine them, but be intentional about what you're trying to say. And if you're a beginner, stick with either a story or facts. You may get mixed up and trying to do both. If you're reporting facts, you can briefly check your sources and select the most crucial things you want to hit on. For stories, they're often more give an emotional impact for your public comment. So for its reason, we sometimes tell a story to draw the audience in and invite them to our own perspectives. Assume they don't know your story and you're giving them a brief window into it. Emotional impact is very powerful, but most of all, make sure to state your position at the beginning and at the end. So next slide. The next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. All right, so right now I'm gonna read through one of my public comments. As you can tell already, it's really long and it's not perfect. I remember editing it and I was waiting for my turn to speak And since a lot of people were calling in, I do not remember you to edit it as you're waiting in line to speak, because it only makes you more nervous about messing up. And if you're just barely starting out, it is a skill that you need to master, and I haven't even mastered yet. So most of the times I try to keep it really short and not edit it I'm waiting to give a call. So on this item, the Board of Supervisors back in January were talking about, or like voting on declaring racism as a public health crisis. So I wrote this. Good afternoon. My name is Bertha Rodriguez, speaking on behalf of Climate Action Campaign. And today I call into support of approving the resolution of declaring racism as a public health crisis. The county must enhance its data collection capabilities to identify racial disparities among programs and policies in order to see how racism affects people's lives in drastic ways. We know communities of color are impacted by systematic forms of racism. For example, National City and the communities of Barrio Logan, San Isidro, City Heights rank in the top 25% for overall hazards in the state. It is not an accident that BIPOC live in hazardous areas that pollute their air and water, causing various health disparities. And it is unacceptable that COVID-19 is impacting Black and Latinx lives more harshly than others. These injustices are interconnected by racism, and environmental racism is one of the various manifestations of inequity that continue to plague our communities. I support the resolution declaring racism a public health crisis as a necessary step towards a more equitable San Diego County. Thank you. So reflecting back on this public comment, the whole time I wrote this, I was thinking, who are my audience and what do I need to tell them? So I was thinking, did my talking points work that time? I say yes and no, because already reading through it the second time, I was like, okay, this is really long. So what I will redo is cut it down and then fix some of the jargon that I have. So like I said, it's not my best public comment, but I wanted to highlight the urgency of this resolution and the disparities that people of color face. On the third sentence, it's highlighted in red. I remember reading through the resolution and adding some of the aspects of it, but it kind of makes it a little bit too long. And so next time I'll just probably cut it out just to make sure that my words and my public comment has more impact. I was also happy that I was able to highlight stats onto my public comment and to illustrate like what communities are struggling more. This time I would write out BIPOC because I know a lot of people don't know what BIPOC means. So this time I would probably write out Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And then the blue words are what I would take out if I only had a limited amount of time. I know these words are important, but time is also very crucial. Overall, I liked how it connected with environmental issues and public comment and hitting all my marks so they would understand my urgency. But as you can tell, like the one time you write it, it might be perfect, it might not be perfect, and you may want to continue to edit. So don't worry about it, practice makes perfect. Next slide. Alrighty, so thank you, perfect. So writing public comment is all about practice. The more you do it, the easier it gets. When you're finished drafting your comment, you may read it and you may want to practice it a couple times. And yes, your first draft says it all. And sometimes that could be a problem. You may not have enough time. Keep that punchy line or keep that perfect stats that you want to add. Eliminate paragraphs maybe, because you might have this one paragraph that you really enjoy, but someone else may be saying that as well. Remember, practice, time yourself, edit and take off unnecessary words, edit again and be punchy. Although I know most of us don't have the time to edit multiple times, most of the time we get a call to action is very last minute and have very little time to edit or practice. If that happens, just write out your name, state your position, one reason why you support it, and the key is getting you to call in or write your comment. It does not have to be perfect. I have messed up multiple times and I'll probably mess up in the future as well, but I still advocated for what I believed in and I know you all can too. And now I'll pass it to Joe.
Joe, you're muted.
Thank you. You want to see there's a mistake already, right? You want to speak slowly enough for people to absorb your words. There's no prize for being the fastest talker. As you practice your comment, you'll probably discover some tongue twisters. Kill those, because you will stumble when you deliver them. Just reword them using slightly different language, usually simpler. By now, you've edited quite a bit, so it's time to make sure this thing fits in the time allocated at a reasonable, calm spoken pace. Use your stopwatch on your phone, but really actually time it several times. If you're close, you must reduce. You don't want the buzzer stopping you, and the clerks will give you the buzzer before you finish your comment. Now, let's look at the next level, so you're killing it at the council. I don't know, I know a lot of engineers, and if an engineer came up and said SDBEC approves EIA RJ45 ports for the 9th floor LAN to facilitate Zoom, I imagine most listeners would be saying, say what? You know, what's really going on here? Please don't speak in alphabet soup and word salad. By the way, in a couple of slides, I will give you the translation of this rather techie thing. This statement's filled with acronyms that is surely going to confuse almost all listeners. It's meant to exaggerate the confusion that can result when we speak tech language rather than people language. Next. Avoid TLAs. In fact, TLA is a TLA. It stands for 3-letter acronyms. For example, what does WWF mean? Or TNN? Go on, next, please. Well, WWF has different meaning depending on the context. Sometimes it has to do with the World Wildlife Fund, and sometimes it has to do with wrestling. In fact, these two organizations got into a lawsuit with each other about this very issue, about who's able to use this acronym. Most of the time when we use acronyms, we will do it in context and people will understand, especially if it's common. But as Bertha said, you know, BIPOC can be confusing the first time you hear it, or maybe the first few times you hear it. So please try to avoid acronyms, and by all means, don't confuse the audience. Next, please. The translation of that techie statement, we recommend Cox or Time Warner Cable Internet Service. Rather stunning difference, isn't it? Next, please. One of my favorite tricks, and I've done many presentations to many thousands of people, is to ask questions, especially rhetorical questions. I've discovered a long time ago that when we ask questions, listeners mentally answer. And if you've asked a rhetorical question and they answer it, and then you say, yes, that's, you know, you answer the question yourself as you're speaking, they're in sync with you and perceive you as a genius, so to speak, and will be empathetic to the rest of what you have to say. When we tell people, especially if we tell them forcefully or in some, you know, arrogant way or whatever, we create mental blocks and our message doesn't get across. When we tell listeners, most often mentally resist. An example, just a simple example. What is the largest source of atmospheric pollution? Well, many people would, especially in the climate world, understand immediately that's CO2. And then when you continue with CO2 is the most dangerous source of pollution, that it's not as bad as methane or whatever you may continue the story with. Beginning by asking the question opens people's minds and is a very effective way to get agreement. Next. And by all means, practice. You know what you're trying to say. Someone else can really help you give important feedback. Speak it to them instead of reading it to them. Don't ask how good is it. Ask if it's clear, compelling, understanding, obnoxious, silly, or whatever. Let them know before you read it that you want help to improve it. That way they'll listen with a more critical ear. I've also found it very helpful to ask someone to read your comment to you. What do you hear? You can listen for glitches, long words, repeated words, and so forth. Put yourself in the place of your audience and ask them, what do they hear? If you hear something that you think isn't as brilliant or as clear as you would like, just make simple, needed adjustments. Linda?
Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to talk about timing. There are a few things you should keep in mind when it comes to how much time you have to speak at a council meeting. Now, some of the following tips will help you shorten your comment, while others will help you lengthen your time for comment past what you're allowed in a meeting. So let's say that today is the day. You've received your toolkit, read the articles, watched the news, written your comment, and practiced it. You've even taken Carl's advice and shown up early to make sure you could find parking, and you've got money for the meter. So you are totally prepared. You enter the room and find it packed full of people, just like you, having shown up to give public comment. You planned for 3 minutes, but with this many people, Council has reduced the amount of time that each speaker has to present. In these situations, depending on the number of people and the number of agenda items to cover, 3 minutes can become 2 minutes, 90 seconds, or even 1 minute. That can ruin what you had to say if you'd prepared and refined your comment to just barely fit into 3 minutes. So, to avoid sounding like an auctioneer at a county fair, it's best to decide ahead of time what you'll cut if your time is shortened. In the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through an example of how you might make last-minute edits to your prepared public comment. So as Carl mentioned, it's best to have your public comment typed out and ready to go before you present to your representatives. This is a comment that I prepared to present to the San Diego Board of Supervisors regarding pollution in the Tijuana River Valley. As you can see, in this first section of my comment, I've organized my statement into sections to make it not only easy to read through, but also easy to see which sections I can cut and still get my message across. As you write and edit your comment, if you keep your major points separate from your descriptive sentences, it will be much easier during a meeting to cut out parts if you need to. So let's break this down. Here in my opening line, I get straight to the point, telling the board that I want them to declare a state of emergency in the Tijuana River Valley and that I want them to allocate funding for a professional cleanup before they open a proposed campground. It's best to start off with the important stuff. So this next part, is it really necessary for them to know that I love nature? No, not really. It emphasizes why I care, but if I'm short on time, this is a sentence that I can easily delete. Now, I'm sure that the Board of Supervisors is aware of the location of the campground, and my point that the posting of signs and beach closures that have been going on for decades is also not news to them. However, I would like to leave this point in to better drive home my message that this problem is not new and deserves their immediate attention. These 3 highlighted sentences are descriptive and general in nature and could easily be cut if my time is reduced. This statement describes the reason that I'm asking for professional assistance in the effort to clean up the valley. It's the only statement that I make to let the board know why I think it's important to involve professionals. basically to keep people, volunteers, from getting sick. So this is a good idea to keep this statement in my comment. Reminding your representatives of their stated goals is never a bad idea. In this case, I'm in agreement with their goals, and I want to encourage them to continue to work toward them in all aspects of their planning. But could I delete this and still make my point? Absolutely. As Bertha and Carl stated earlier, it's a good idea to end your comment by reminding your representatives of what you want them to do. So I'm going to keep this last sentence. So from this example, you can see how best to organize your comment so that if you run short on time, you can still feel confident that your message was delivered clearly and concisely. Now, editing on the fly doesn't always mean cutting out segments to save time. Sometimes you're going to have the opportunity to add to your prepared statement to make your comment more effective. Adding comments based on what others have said in a meeting is a good way to be more engaged with council and also with your fellow activists. Once you have your comments typed out, you can jot down notes in the white space to add additional comments based on what others have said. Additional comments can be based on something that a representative said during the meeting, a comment or a statistic that was cited in a presentation, or something that another speaker said during their comments. In reality, editing real time can mean both deleting and adding to your comment. If I've prepared my comment and I'm 12th in line to speak, I may strike a point that has been made several times so as not to be repetitive, and then add to my comment based on what others have said before me. Now, this is a very simple example of edits that I made to a public comment that I gave at an Encinitas City Council meeting. My comments here are in support of a climate action plan update. Now, before the council opened the floor to public comments, a presentation was given to update the council on the progress of the climate action plan. While listening to that presentation, I noted that Encinitas is making good progress toward their climate goals. In another part of the meeting, I took note of comments made by council regarding the negative effects that the local businesses were experiencing due to the pandemic. And lastly, I heard and appreciated the mayor's stated desire to use data in the decision-making process. And I wanted to point that out in my statement. So on the next slide, we're going to watch the video of my comments. So this meeting, just to give you some background, this meeting was held on November 18th of 2020. The San Diego Green New Deal Alliance that evening had several speakers on the call in favor of approving the climate action plan. Now, in addition to voicing my approval, I wanted to focus on the economics of making citywide changes to combat climate change and to voice my support of a just transition for all workers. You'll hear in my statement that I referred to comments that were made earlier during the meeting. Now, these were not grand changes, but instead, it served to humanize the council members and also to mention how important I believe using data is to a successful transition.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Blakespear and Encinitas Council members. My name is Yolanda Montero. I'm calling in support of this climate action plan update, which will help ensure that Encinitas remains a healthy, safe, and productive city well into the future. I appreciated hearing about the progress you have made so far. I understand that there will be costs incurred in the years to come, and changes will have to be made to systems that have been in place for many years. However, the cost of doing nothing will be catastrophic for the environment as well as the economy. As you move forward with your climate action plan, it is imperative that you consider the economics of these changes as they apply to all affected parties. The path forward must include a just transition for everyone. This includes job training for those whose jobs will be at risk of being lost. Your concern voiced earlier this evening for small businesses who are being negatively affected by the pandemic is indicative of your dedication to the health and well-being of the city. And while there is much work to be done to lower greenhouse gas emissions and combat climate change, I am confident that with proper planning and a focus on data, your efforts can be a model for other communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that you've seen an example of how to edit your comments during a meeting, I'm going to go one step further to show you how to get additional time to really drive your point home.
Thank you. Good evening.
more to say than the time you are allowed, or if you'd like to share a website, imagery, or video, commenting via web form before a meeting or emailing your representatives after the meeting is a good way to extend the amount of time you have to comment. When submitting an e-comment prior to a meeting, be sure to follow the rules outlined by the city clerk so your comments can be included in the record. Emailing council after a meeting is another way to tell a more compelling story. If you do decide to email comments, however, be sure not to wait too long. So it's one thing to tell representatives that I feel that it is important that they ensure a just transition and not leave anyone behind in the process of achieving their climate goals, but how do I expect them to do that? After I gave my public comment regarding the Encinitas Climate Action Plan, I sent an email to Mayor Blakespear and the Encinitas City Council. I wanted to share resources that I thought would help them make decisions that will result in positive outcomes. So I included 4 links to articles that discuss the economic side of climate action plans. In the email, I thanked the council for passing the update and acknowledged that they have much work to do. Then I let them know that I am concerned about possible pushback from labor groups as the council works to combat the effects of climate change. Now, I did not minimize the concerns of the labor groups, but instead I shared resources that I found from state and federal agencies that have outlined how to achieve a just transition for all workers while moving forward with climate action plans. I also reiterated my appreciation of the mayor's focus on the use of data in the decision-making process. With that email, not including my salutation and closing, I managed to add 1.5 minutes to my original comment, in addition to adding links to reading materials that will help the representatives consider the economics of the transition to a cleaner environment, which is exactly what I want them to do. Later that afternoon, I received this reply from Mayor Blakespear. Now, I have no idea whether or not the council will use any of the information that I provided to them. I do, however, feel confident that I got my point across. Elected officials have to make decisions that affect their constituents, and they cannot be expected to be an expert on everything. By reaching out and sharing resources, you can work to help them make decisions that result in positive outcomes. Now I'm going to pass our presentation on to Rita Clement, who will talk more about how to engage with elected officials beyond the council room.
Thank you, Deolinda. Good evening, everyone. As you know, most people are less likely to change their mind on the spot. You must build on an issue. Just because you gave compelling comment does not mean the council member will have a change of heart. A better way to ensure that things will go your way or to help elected officials consider your arguments is to make those beforehand. Written public comment will generally be read by officials before the meeting, but don't count on it. Instead, set up a meeting with the official days or even weeks in advance of the meeting and make the same points in a face-to-face as we used to do before COVID, or a Zoom or Google Meet or a telephone meeting. This allows the official to respond to you, and you can dialogue and work at convincing them if they are not in favor of your issue. You can also learn compelling reasons why they do support the issue, and you can use that with other officials or in your public comment. Be aware that sharing officials' opinions with others can be dangerous, and it's best to not speak of where you got these fresh ideas. In fact, the Brown Act has rules about sharing information among a plurality of officials in a non-public forum. So this is one time everyone will appreciate a lack of acknowledgement of whose ideas and opinions you're sharing. Next slide. After your comment, as Deolinda showed us, you should consider reaching out to officials to turn the one-way conversation into a dialogue. Perhaps you may comment as a single representative of a group, and you can use your follow-up as a way of introducing more members of your group, and the official can then hear their voices as well. No one likes to be talked at, so make sure you're listening, leaving room for the official to speak and share. And if you see common ground, make sure to acknowledge that. This technique is effective to convince prior to a vote, but can also be effective to build respect after a vote. Consider an email or letter expressing your appreciation for their support on your issue. Political work is thankless if we aren't thankful. Next slide. You may offer to speak in a group during non-agenda public comment, which is usually at the beginning of a meeting. Multiple activists work together on a combined comment or story. This is difficult to do in a Zoom meeting. When we are in person in the future, we hand in slips showing our names and the item number we want to discuss. We have done this when speaking about the franchise agreements at City of San Diego Council meetings. It's important to state your district or place of residence. Council members pay closer attention when you reside in their council district. However, you may speak anywhere and do not need to live in the district or the City of San Diego. The multiple speaker strategy is used to drive home a point. The San Diego Green New Deal Alliance has a party line where we usually gather together before a council meeting. This slide shows a time when Carl Aldinger, Tara Hammond, and Sheila Ott worked together on chat about the stormwater issue. The meeting had started at 11 o'clock and Tara had to go to another meeting at 1:30. So Carl notified her when it appeared the stormwater issue was open for public comment. We can take turns notifying others so we do not have to stay on a call for hours on end. And now I'd like to introduce Berta Rodriguez, who is giving some words of that we can reflect upon and remember.
Thank you, Rita. So that I was thinking through giving public comment, and I've been trying to reflect more and think how we can make public comment more accessible. We acknowledge that it's difficult for various communities to be able to give public comment. For example, there's language barriers or even giving public comments during work hours, and so not everybody has that access. The intention of this training was to simplify aspects of advocacy and government. We all have different lived experiences, and the way we present ourselves drastically shifts how the government will listen to us. The systems that are in place uplift white supremacy, and we can see how government is not accessible to all of us. Giving public comment is one of those structures that are in place. This makes me think about what Audre Lorde wrote. She is a critical Black feminist writer, and she wrote, "Survival is not an academic skill. It's learning how to stand alone, unpopular, and how to make common cause with those others identified as outside the structures in order to define and seek a world in which we can all flourish. It is learning how to take our differences and make them strengths. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." And so public comment is one of the tools that we use, but in order to bring genuine change, we must transform how we coexist in this planet. I know we have a long road and it's a difficult road as well, but I know united we can do it. Recording these trainings, creating toolkits, organizing together, those are the first steps in creating a better and more just world where we can not only survive, but also thrive. Thank you, everybody. And with this, we can go to questions.
You now have the tools to help spread the word about climate change solutions You can make this region a better place to work, live, and play. Carl Eldinger created a summary of these two presentations. We will send it to you on Friday, and you can feel free to use it going forward. These two trainings have been recorded. You will find them on the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance website right around March 18th. We hope to see you soon making public comments with everyone here. You have the courage and you have the confidence. What does democracy look like? This is what democracy looks like. And now, do you have any questions?
I see one from Pat. If previous speakers have said everything you would have said, can you just say you agree with the previous speaker, Jane Doe, etc., but still repeat the action you are trying to request?
Yes. The short answer, it seems to me that often we'll have 10 or 20 speakers all in support of a particular initiative, and just the volume of comments adds weight and hopefully influences the decision in a way that the majority of speakers are proposing.
It's a good point, Pat, because oftentimes the council members will hear this repetition and they will appreciate you just getting on and saying, I support that as well. And ending your comment there, it helps speed things up, but they want to know how many people showed up in support or not in support. And so you don't want to not speak. You still want to speak, but shortening it can be very helpful for everyone involved.
I have a question. How would you compare the written statement as opposed to showing up and verbally making that similar statement? Does it being there give it a lot more weight, or is writing almost as effective? I know that's a subjective issue, but something I thought about.
If you write, they may not read. If you're there, you can assert yourself and make the points that you choose to make, and they can't ignore you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good.
Another thing that's that can be very frustrating about writing your public comment ahead of time is oftentimes you will hear something during the course of the meeting that really makes you want to say something a little different.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you might find out that staff reports on things in an entirely different way, and it was not really included even in the staff report completely. And so when you start to hear that, you're like, oh, now my comments don't even make sense.
Right.
And I need to pivot a little bit. So that's another good reason to kind of give them in the spirit and in the moment of the actual meeting. And I think being able to expose your comments to all the other people in the room is also very important. And I think it's very rare that folks will go and read your written comment in addition to the extensive packets that are given for these agendas. I'm sure it happens, but we do hope that the council members read those comments. What's really best, Barbara, is to do both, to be very honest with you. And if you've already written out your public comment anyway, it's kind of a no-brainer to send it in, and then that way it's in the record easily.
Right. Double delight. So
that's right. Yeah, and that doesn't cost you a stamp. It's done electronically.
Well, when you write it too, you could just put like bold letters for the main point, and then have your supporting statements underneath, so they don't have to read that, but they know the main point.
Yeah, and you can put hyperlinks in there to things that you really wanted to point out, which is really good too.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I know you said not to take too much time addressing or greeting each council member individually, But let's say you already have interacted with your council member a few times. Can you just give like the general greeting and one specific to your council member, or just keep it simple? What would be the best thing? And
So if you only have 1 minute, which
Yeah,
we've been
just-
seeing a lot of lately, it's really a poor use of your time to address them by name.
Yep.
I think if you've got 3 minutes and it's a very sparsely attended meeting, and it looks like you're going to be the only one giving public comment, which you'll know when you're there in person, if that's the case, then sure, take your time. And they may remember you more, that the fact that you did that and you called out your specific council member. So there's no harm in doing that when you have the time and it's not weighing everybody else down.
but during the phone ones, it's really difficult to know how many other people may be there.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
well, don't
Well,
they have?
sometimes they say there are 30, sorry, sometimes they say there are 30 people
Right,
waiting to comment. Or 10.
Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll start by saying, we have 5 people that are going to comment, and they get up to the 4th one and they say, we actually have 19 now, because it takes them a little while to see all of the folks filtering in. And, we mentioned the idea of your time going from 3 minutes down to 2 minutes or 1 minute. And we should point out that generally an entire meeting will use the same numbers. But again, we've seen situations where in the general non-agenda public comment at the beginning, they start out with the 3 minutes, and then they get to their item and they realize, oh, there's a lot of speakers here and this is going to be a long meeting already. So we determined it would be in our best interest if we cut this down to 90 seconds. So you have to be ready to pivot. What I usually do is, in those cases where my comment is really important, I'll make a 3 minute, a 2 minute, and a 1 minute version right there on the same page, on the same piece of paper, maybe like front and back. And so I'm ready, loaded for bear. I don't really have to think too much about how to alter my comment, because I've practiced it at those different speeds and I already know. And you're a lot more relaxed when you're not afraid that you're not going to make it.
Is there a little timer that shows you how many seconds you have, like a countdown? I was so nervous I didn't even see it, so I blah 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 and left.
On many of the websites on the Zooms, they do have a timer. Another way to think about it is, in normal speech, we can speak about 125 to 150 words a minute.
Mhm.
So if you use that as a guideline for how long your comment is, that gives you a good ballpark.
A lot of the council meetings will have a timer at the dais as well.
Yeah.
And even if it's a pop-up meeting, like I was at a CARB meeting in a hotel in a ballroom, and they still came equipped with their dais with a timer.
Mhm.
So, but you need to be listening for that buzzer. Sometimes it's just a pling, 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 pling. And you may be the first one in that meeting that's hit it, so don't let it throw you off. But I mean, after you've done this a while, you'll realize I never want to be in that situation where I get cut off and I didn't finish what I really started
Yeah,
out.
I left earlier. Look, what happened to me, which wasn't good. It was my first time. I got there. It was packed. There was like a whole lot of issues there. And wouldn't you know it, I was the first one. I go, oh, they say Barbara Downey. No, not first. But they don't tell you the order of who will talk first. And it's nice to not go first. I think maybe it is good to go first if you're real confident in yourself. But
Usually the one thing that you can count on is that the clerk will not start the timer before you've begun.
Oh,
So, your gut reaction is, I've got to sprint up to that thing because they called my name and the timer must be running. But that's generally not the case. They'll if there's a line of people speaking one after the other and they're calling out a new name, when they call your name, you can walk up, don't trip, take your time getting up there, get your paper ready, get your mic adjusted, and then as soon as you start speaking, that's generally when the timer starts.
Okay.
But you don't want to be looking at that timer while you're talking. That'll distract you too.
Yeah, I bet.
So does anybody have any reflections about times that they have given public comment that they wanted to sort of remark on? I know, Barbara, you just did a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyone have any anecdotes or their own personal advice that they would want to give? Paige, you've done this a number of times. Any reflections about things that you've learned?
Yes, I was speaking at a meeting in Chula Vista about community choice energy. And two of the environmental science teachers had brought students to speak. But it was at the end of the meeting and the students had to leave to go home and do their homework. So a teacher said, next week, can we please have the students speak first? And the mayor agreed to it and they changed the agenda around. So there's different situations where you can make an impact.
That's a good story. And also it reminds us, Rita, that they do have the power to shift their agenda around right at the beginning of a meeting. And that's not that uncommon. So it's another good reason to not count on the fact that, oh, I'm item 10, that won't happen until hour 2 or 3. That's not always the case. Sometimes they'll realize they have a lot of speakers for a given item, and they'll jump that one up to the front of the meeting because they don't want to make everyone sit around. So yeah, these agendas are not written in stone, and they will sometimes kick something off the agenda at the last minute, and they will move things around too.
Oh, that's so maddening.
Pat.
Yeah, recently I was going to speak at Oceanside City Council on Zoom. And I was, there were maybe 30 people listed. So he calls my name and I'm trying to unmute and it won't unmute. It says only the administrator can unmute you. And he's going, Pat, unmute yourself. And I'm trying to unmute myself. And it says participant cannot unmute. And I was like, probably like this.
Sign
Okay, we'll go to the next person. So then I was going into my email to send them an email. And then he says, okay, now we realize we unmuted the wrong person. I hear this, but I'm in my email. Now we've unmuted the wrong person. So we will now call Pat Tirona again to speak. And I'm not prepared at all because I'm in there sending this blasted email. I'm like, can you see me? Can you hear me? Because I can't tell. And it really threw me off, but I wanted to just let you know that sometimes they don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah, that happened to one of our volunteers at Sierra Club just last week, and nothing he did wrong on his side. He unmuted himself 4 or 5 times, and it was something wrong with their system. And they knew it, and they kept, calling him back, and they even tried to bring him up at the end of the meeting, and it just never worked out. So what our takeaway from that as a group is if we really needed to give that comment, we should have had a backup person so that if one fails, then another one can still give comment.
Speaking to that, I didn't know how to put my hand up, what to click here. So what do you click for next? I want to put my hand up. And
that's a very confusing part of Zoom because they keep changing the interface. And it depends on whether you're logged in as a host or whether you're a participant and whether it's a webinar or not. And so it's kind of a lousy thing that's not very consistent, but usually there's a participants button that you can click on in Zoom. And if you can manage to click on that, you'll see a list of all the names. And then in there, you can click the raise hand. Otherwise, you can do this and wave your hand around. But you may be on a subsequent screen if there's lots of participants and they may not see you doing this with your hands. And there's a reactions button too, which is like clap and thumbs up. And so sometimes you can do something like that and people will still say, oh, clearly this person wants to speak.
Reactions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that's the raised hand. I had to push reactions. It didn't occur to me to press that button.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, actually, the one that most people talk about is under participants, and then when you find yourself on
Oh,
there, then there's a more button, and then from there you can raise a hand, but not always. So it's just it's kind of
participants.
yeah, it's kind of a terrible way to have to ask people to participate,
Yeah,
and,
I don't
and
even
everyone's struggling with it.
participants, and then I still don't see it. I did participants invite. No.
Barbara, sometimes under the three little dots for, it
Yeah, and
depends
like I
on
said,
what
it's
device
kind
you
of
have.
it's a moving target. I've seen it change so many times on Zoom that I don't really want to count on it anymore.
Well,
For
I guess if reactions would work, right?
Yeah, probably.
Reactions, right? Raise a hand. There I go. Yay. Now I know. I learned at least one thing tonight, how to raise my hand. Okay.
Any other questions or reflections that people want to share about giving public comment or funny things they saw happen at a meeting that they never thought they'd see? We had a fellow activist or advocate who was he was giving public comment. We'd had already a dozen people give comment, and they were clearly just unmuting us. They were not using our cameras, and so he got very comfortable in his chair. He sat back like this, and he had like a scarf around his neck. He was feeling very cozy, and they unmuted him, but they actually activated his camera. He was the only speaker that they did that with. And he gave his entire comment, not having any idea that he was on live video throughout the whole city, which was probably good because he didn't, get shocked. And he finished his comment, and we were chatting with him. We said, "Hey, Dave, did you know your video was live?" He's like, "No, it wasn't." Yeah, Dave, it was. So our takeaway from that is be prepared in a Zoom meeting that, if you're there in a bathrobe, you might end up being on camera even when you didn't expect it. And that was just somebody at the city pushed the wrong button and asked to open up his video, which none of us knew they would even have the power to do, but they did. So,
well, if you put a little tape over the camera, that would.
It wasn't too embarrassing. He just looked a little bit more relaxed than I think he would have liked to.
But it could be embarrassing.
Yeah. Paige?
I just wanted to comment, sometimes when you have like a protracted message that you're trying to give over many meetings, that rather than having the same one or two people give them, we've tried to recruit more speakers. So it seems like there's a bigger audience that's supporting your issue. So I would encourage you to do that, just like Joe's going to submit comments for us on our climate emergency on Tuesday. Right, Joe?
Right. I think in general, more is better, whether it's across multiple meetings or in a single meeting.
Right.
Everybody who's here should attempt to speak, at least once a week if you can, get out there, speak.
It's funny, we asked Mayor Blakespear once when we were talking with her, would you like a lot of us to show up in support of this issue, or would you like less of us to show up? Do you want us to dominate this meeting with a ton of public comment? And I thought her answer was interesting. She basically said, we appreciate the numbers because that helps us understand that it's not just one person. But if you have big numbers to turn out, then we would appreciate you not taking a full 3 minutes or whatever it is to speak if you all have a common message. So, and I think that's important. Like sometimes we coordinate our messages very carefully so that we're all saying something slightly different and we're still giving a lot of good comment. But if you're not able to do that and you realize you may all be pretty repetitive, it's okay to just be brief and then move on to the next person, because what they want to hear is that there's a lot of support for something, and they may hear other voices where there's not a lot of support, and it's important for them to hear that tally too.
I have a question. I've never done this before, but would it be appropriate to say I'm speaking on behalf of Barbara, Carl, Joe, and I'm to just indicate that there's support for what you're saying without having multiple speakers?
Yeah, I suppose you could, Paige. So you're saying like, if you realize your whole crew showed up, but this is dragging on and this is kind of a foregone conclusion. I think you could say like, I've seen that done in in-person meetings when someone turns and looks back at the audience and there's 14 people in San Diego 350 shirts, and you say, all of these people turned out in support of this. And that's powerful too. And you don't have to have every one of them come up and speak, but the fact that they all showed up speaks volumes.
Mhm.
That's
Point of-
another technique you guys we may not have talked about is if you're bringing a posse to a meeting, have them all wear a common color or hold up a sign that shows that they're all there in solidarity, and they don't have to hold it up during the whole meeting. That's disruptive. But when someone goes to give that public comment,
And you hold it
and
up.
we see this a lot, like organized labor does this. You know, they may show up in their union t-shirts, they may not, maybe they're coming from a job and they didn't think to do it, but they'll hand out those placards or signs so that, you know, everybody that made it to that meeting can hold up their sign and say, here, I am in support of this as well.
Yeah.
Barb.
I was going to agree with that. We did that for North River Farms too. One other point that occurred to me to make was, first off, that how great the seminar has been. You've really touched on all the important points. Prep and rehearsing and making sure you're staying within your time is really important. One other thing that, as far as the importance of this is concerned, is if you think this issue could possibly go to litigation or some kind of an appeal, you have to have the litigation points or the appeal points part of the public record. So your public comments may be very important for a subsequent court case. And
right.
I know that was the case with North River Farms.
Yeah, you get rid of their plausible deniability because you said it in a public meeting and those officials were there and they were duly warned. And if they can't claim later, we had no idea that that was going to happen.
Or you cannot go to court and say, we're going to litigate this thing that was approved by the city council when nobody raised the issues you're trying to raise in the court case during any of the public hearings or by submitting any comments.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's important.
So, okay, for more detail on that, what you say what your position is, but how would you clarify it further to be what Barb is suggesting is important? Like, I don't know the mechanics of it.
Well, so it could be something as simple as the staff recommends that we put up this big housing complex because the developers want it and they've done the EIR and everything looks kosher to them. And city council says, well, hearing no objections, we're pretty much bound to vote yes on this. Nobody from the public has told us this would be a bad idea. We're hearing from the developers, they think it's a good idea. And so I think what Barb's saying is, if you stood up at the public comment meeting and said, here are 5 reasons why this housing complex should not go up, then when you have to go to court later and you throw up these 5 ideas for why that housing complex should not be there, the court will say, oh yeah, and actually you did say this because we're looking at it in public record. It was said months before the permit was approved. And council, you can't claim that you didn't know that this was going to happen. You were given notice. And now as a judge, I have to, determine that you discounted these complaints. And now we have to look at them more critically and have the court hearing over it.
That clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay, folks, so it's around 8 o'clock. we really appreciate everybody showing up tonight. We do have a written version of kind of the notes for what we covered tonight. And I hope that you file those away someplace so that even if you take a break from public commenting for a while and then you get back to it a little later, or you meet somebody that wants to do this and you want to give them a quick lesson on it, they don't necessarily have to watch our 2 hours. They could read this thing too. So that's helpful. And then we've got both of these recorded. And so we'll send you out those recordings, maybe not right away because we need to remix them a little bit and get them up on the website. But we will send you a reminder about where they are so that you can share them with other people. And if you have any feedback that you want to send us later about things that we want to include next time we do one of these, we'd appreciate hearing that too.
Okay. Thank you, Carl, and everybody else.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
night.